across this quadrant of stars. Travel is a game of engines and alloy. Civilizations rise through propulsion, fall through miscalculation. Every known species in the Concorde uses ships, hulking, humming war vessels, trade freighters the size of cities, exploratory cruisers that scream through FDL currents. The assumption is simple. Space is too cold, too vast, too lethal to cross without a hull. No species has ever contested that truth. Not until humans. The archives of the Concorde are thorough. Over 2,000 races, each one charted, scanned, studied. They all followed the same arc. Domesticate fire, master metal, breach atmosphere, build ships. The consensus among xenohistorians is that this pattern is universal, inevitable even. There's no other path to the stars. The stars demand tribute in steel and circuitry. So when the humans made contact, the assumption was they were like everyone else, just another race cradling their fragile flame in steel cylinders. The early scans showed an industrial planet with deep space tech, atmospheric satellites, radio bursts indicating recent emergence. The Council marked them for first contact observation, standard procedure, but the reports began to raise questions. The first anomalies came from scout drones observing Earth's orbit. There were no docking rings, no orbital ports, no defensive platforms. Only outdated satellites, some derelict, others looping in decaying orbits. Planet-based scans showed even stranger things. Rocket museums, shipyards converted to housing, launch complexes rusting beneath moss. Worse still, humans hadn't launched anything in years. Their last observable spacecraft was decades old. There were no vessels incoming or outgoing, no traffic patterns, no warp signatures, not even basic shuttles. Concorde analysts debated in private. One theory suggested Earth had regressed technologically. Another posited they had suffered a planetary catastrophe that cut off development. Both theories failed to explain the other reports. Rumors of humans showing up elsewhere, in places no known warp corridor could explain. That was dismissed as error. Perhaps rogue Concorde tech had been stolen. Perhaps another race was mimicking humans. But then the incident at the Concorde Summit happened. The summit is held once every 30 cycles. This time, it was hosted on Trellises 4, a neutral gas-tempered station orbiting twin suns. Over 200 representatives attended, biological, synthetic, hybrid. The session was underway when it occurred. A human appeared. He didn't arrive in a ship. There was no docking alert, no warp ripple, no thermal signature. One moment, the corridor was empty. The next, he was standing at the gate, calm, unarmed, breathing calmly in nothing more than a simple black suit. Security was baffled. Weapons locked on him instantly. Biological sensors screamed anomalies. No one moved. The silence was deep enough to choke. The human spoke only once. "I'm here to talk." That moment sent shockwaves through the Concorde hierarchy. Some called it a breach. Others, a threat. Investigators tore through footage, data logs, energy scans. They found no trace of transportation. The human had simply appeared. A private emergency hearing was held with the highest ranks of the Concorde. The footage was replayed again and again. Tech experts were flown in to verify it wasn't doctored. It wasn't. The data was clean. The human walked, breathed, blinked, and vanished again just as quietly, without ever using a door, corridor, or ship. Alien leaders argued. Some demanded immediate retaliation, a show of force against Earth. Others warned against provoking a race that could deploy individuals without detectable means. A few suggested peace. But the truth burned more than the theories. The humans had broken a law of reality the rest of the galaxy had taken for granted. One species. No ships. No fleets. And yet, they were among the stars. It was an insult to tradition, to science, to the natural laws of warp and matter. If one species could bypass all this, what else had they bypassed? The human dossier was reopened, now labeled Priority Red. Surveillance was tripled. Embassies on Earth sent urgent diplomatic feelers. No response. The humans remained silent, unmoving, unreachable, until the second appearance. This time, It wasn't at a summit. It was on an outpost in the Andalan sector, an unremarkable mining colony with limited access. No warp gates, no FTL lanes, minimal surveillance. Yet a human materialized in the command center, looked directly into the camera feed, and smiled, then disappeared. That's when fear began to set in. The Concord prides itself on control, on detection, classification, identification. Nothing moved without being tagged, tracked, registered. The idea of a species that could move without trace, without permission, it was heresy. It was terror. Behind closed doors, the whispers began. Had humans found a way to teleport? Were they manipulating gravity? Had they discovered a hidden layer of subspace? Or, most chillingly, were they evolving beyond technology itself? The question no one wanted to ask was beginning to haunt them all. What if humans no longer needed ships? What if they'd found something better? The third appearance changed everything. A Concorde cruiser, the vast deliberation, was in deep space patrol formation near the Black Maw, a stellar graveyard where only the desperate dared enter. No known lanes existed there. It was a dead zone. The cruiser picked up a signal. 3 short pulses, rhythmic, oddly biological. The signal wasn't from a beacon. It was from a person, standing on the hull. No oxygen, no ship, just a human, arms at sides, eyes open, facing the stars. The crew panicked. Evacuation protocols were initiated. But before action could be taken, the human vanished, leaving only a faint shift in quantum background radiation. And this time, the data was undeniable. The human had left no burn, no warp, no drive residue. The space around him wasn't disturbed. He had not come through space. He had simply been there. The Concorde fleet returned home under highest encryption. War councils were formed. Emergency summits convened. Quiet diplomatic attempts were made toward Earth. Still, no answer, because the humans, it seemed, were never at home. They were everywhere else. They had stepped off the path every species had taken, and found something new, and the galaxy was beginning to realize they hadn't just found a new way to travel, they had found a new way to exist. Panic wasn't the right word for what gripped the Concorde. It was closer confusion laced with dread, the kind that didn't scream, but whispered in high command halls, behind sealed council doors. The kind that made admirals flinch and scientists forget their equations. The humans were out there. They were moving, and no one could explain how. The second encounter was still under review when the third and fourth happened almost simultaneously. One on a diplomatic frigate en route to the Veldari cluster, the other on a terraforming station orbiting a barren moon in the Brask fields. In both cases, a human appeared. Alone, silent, harmless, no ships, no detectable means of entry or exit. Just there, on the frigate, the human stood in a crew hallway. Security footage caught him gazing at an honor plaque before vanishing. On the station, a technician swore the human helped recalibrate a failing reactor before disappearing into a corridor that led nowhere. The logs didn't show the door opening. The walls hadn't been breached. There was no physical explanation. Commanders convened. Defense networks were activated. The top-ranking minds in the Concorde were summoned to decode what was happening. The hypothesis that humans had simply developed superior stealth technology no longer held water. This was not stealth. This was something else. A special operations division was formed, unofficially, composed of species who excelled in espionage and fieldwork. Their mission was simple: observe, engage if possible, contain if necessary. They called themselves Project Horizon. The first interception attempt took place on the rim world of Dassel Prime, a volcanic planet known for unstable gravity wells. A human appeared outside the planetary research lab, stood motionless for 3 minutes, and then began to walk toward the main structure. The strike team moved in, fully cloaked, armed with ion nets and pulse stunners. Standard protocol. None of it worked. The moment they engaged, the human vanished. Not teleported, not phased, simply ceased to be there. Later review of sensor logs revealed the entire region had experienced a quantum latency anomaly, something never before recorded. The human hadn't escaped. The human had stopped being local. No propulsion, no FTL, no inertia, just a shift in presence. That report shook Project Horizon's foundations. They were chasing shadows that obeyed no laws they knew. Some team members resigned. Others argued for escalation. But the humans didn't respond to threats, nor did they seem interested in confrontation, until they started appearing in groups. 6 of them materialized aboard the station Yelsarik, a diplomatic stronghold near the border systems. They walked together, synchronized, directly through a sealed alloy wall, without triggering any of its sensors. They entered the central chamber, left a crystalline object on the table, and vanished again. The object was analyzed. It emitted no energy, encoded no known language, and yet, when touched, gave each delegate a different sensation. Images, memories, emotions. Some wept. One had to be hospitalized due to cognitive overload. The Concord began to fracture over what to do. Some species wanted to reach out with peace. Others advocated preemptive retaliation. A few called for containment zones around Earth, assuming it was still the origin point. That, too, was becoming a question, because probes sent to Earth were returning nothing. Not scrambled data, not hostile fire, just nothing. Silence. As if the planet was no longer transmitting. The blue marble sat there, cloud-covered and calm, but no signals came in or out. No emissions. No measurable thermal flux. Like a painting hanging in a museum, real but unreachable. Internal communication between Concord allies grew tense. Fleets were quietly redirected. New weapons were authorized. Old doctrines were rewritten. The idea that humans had found a new way to travel was terrifying, but the idea they were evolving into something else was worse. Then came the most direct contact yet. On the artificial moon Nexus VA, where the Concord kept its AI memory banks and ancient diplomatic records, a message was left. No intrusion was recorded, yet the message appeared etched into a central monolith of obsidian alloy, a substance considered impenetrable. It read, "You think we walk. We never learned to crawl." The implications were staggering. Humans, by their own words, had skipped the process every other species endured. No crawling, no walking. They simply appeared, across space, beyond time. No ships, no gates, no guidance. They moved the way thought moved, immediate, formless, instinctive. Some suggested they had mastered consciousness transfer. Others believed they were using a form of biological quantum computation, something that allowed them to bend locality. A few theorized they were no longer entirely physical beings. But the message was clear. The humans did not need what the galaxy considered essential, not even for the first step. Pressure mounted. The Concord feared not an invasion, but irrelevance. What place did fleets have when a being could go from one star system to another without even container? What purpose did trade lanes serve when matter itself could be bypassed? Finally, one Concord fleet commander, Admiral Kellier of the Vascari Combine, took action. Without approval, without warning, he moved a fleet of 12 cruisers toward Earth, loaded with containment bombs and null-space torpedoes. His message to the Council was curt. If we fear them, we must remove them. But the fleet never arrived. On their approach, every ship received a single burst of sound. 5 notes, harmonic, slow. Then the stars vanished. Every external sensor returned static. Interior lights dimmed. The void grew blacker than black. Instruments melted. Communications failed. For 28 minutes, no one aboard the 12 ships could move. Not frozen, not paralyzed, simply disconnected, as if reality had turned its back on them. Then it all returned. The stars blinked back. The systems rebooted. But Admiral Kelly was gone. No body, no trace, just his uniform, neatly folded on the command dais. A final message appeared across all ship terminals. "We are not your enemy, unless you insist." And with that, the debate ended. The Concord had encountered something it had never faced. A force that didn't conquer, didn't demand, didn't explain. A presence that existed outside the known tools of diplomacy or war. The humans weren't invading. They weren't expanding. They were just moving. And everyone else was too slow to follow. The paradigm had shifted. No longer were the humans considered a rogue anomaly to be studied or feared. They were now the silent mirror held up to the Concorde's deepest insecurities. Across the galaxy, the consensus became harder to maintain. What if we had always misunderstood the point of space travel? What if ships, fleets, propulsion, they weren't triumphs but crutches? Among the species most affected was the Trellan Consortium, a civilization that prided itself on the elegance of their vessels, each one handcrafted like a work of art. For the Trellans, spaceflight was not just movement. It was culture, status, even spirituality. The concept of humans transcending that entire philosophy without effort or acknowledgement was more than offensive. It was heretical. So they tried to communicate, not diplomatically, not with envoys, but with a test. They constructed a beacon, larger than any previous one, placed it in orbit around their homeworld, and encoded a challenge into the quantum signature. A message to humans: come, show us. The beacon sat untouched for weeks, monitored day and night. Then, at the edge of a synflar, a human appeared beside it. No ship, no suit, just a dark silhouette suspended in light. Arms crossed, gaze calm. The beacon changed. Not externally. No wires moved, no circuit sparked. But its output shifted. The encoded message was overwritten. The new message, when decoded, was a perfect replication of the Trellan anthem, note for note, except now it was harmonized, enhanced, with a second melody that no one had ever heard before. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. The Trellans didn't speak of it publicly, but the melody spread. Scientists analyzed its structure. Mathematicians tried to model the intervals. No one could replicate it. It resonated in ways known physics couldn't explain. It wasn't just music. It was presence. As if the humans hadn't just answered the challenge, they had transformed it. Other races tried similar things. Invitations, challenges, experiments. The Scarn Republic placed humans in isolation chambers designed to suppress all forms of neural activity. Yet the humans within remained unaffected, conscious, serene. The Lee Carr Syndicate attempted to measure their quantum states mid-appearance, only to find that their instruments recorded signatures consistent with multiple locations at once. The Maelori swarm even tried to trap, one using an artificial singularity. But the humans stepped in and out of the containment zone, as if it were a puddle. Every attempt yielded more questions. By now, even the most cynical voices in the Concorde had to admit the truth. Humanity had stepped into a domain that none of them understood. Their appearances were no longer rare. They became a phenomenon, mythic figures glimpsed across mining colonies, war zones, and research vessels. Sometimes a single figure, sometimes several. They never spoke unless spoken to, and their answers, when given, were cryptic but precise. A Varnak priest once asked a human, "What are you?" The reply came without delay. "We are the question you stopped asking." Another time, a Synthezoid commander asked, "What do you want?" The human simply said, "To remember what you've forgotten." A pattern began to emerge. Humans didn't act like invaders. They didn't posture like gods. They didn't seem interested in dominance, conquest, or even attention. Their presence was subtle, soft, deliberate. It was as if they moved not through space, but with it. More troubling was what they didn't do. They didn't warn, didn't threaten, didn't retaliate when threatened. They just moved on, in and out, quiet as gravity, present but never staying. The Concorde Council drafted a new directive. Do not interfere. Do not provoke. Do not pursue. Observation only. But younger species didn't always obey. A pirate clan on the rim planet Arbash thought to capture a human. They managed to isolate a figure during one of the appearances, surrounding him with null fields, suppressors, displacers. By all accounts, the trap worked for 6 seconds. Then every pirate on the outpost fell unconscious simultaneously. When they awoke, their weapons were gone. Their engines were dismantled. The human was gone too, but on the wall, written in their own native tongue, was a message. You cannot hold wind with closed fists. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. At this point, a new theory emerged, one that was less scientific, more philosophical. It came from the Uxery, one of the oldest species in the Concorde. They suggested that humans were no longer biological entities in the conventional sense, that they had discovered a way to merge consciousness with probability, living not in space but in possibility. This, they claimed, was why humans no longer needed ships, because they had become the method of travel itself, not observers of space, but participants in its structure. Their bodies still appeared human. Their eyes still looked like eyes. But what moved wasn't just a person. It was intent. Manifested, this idea unsettled many. Because if humans had become a form of living algorithm, able to traverse the folds of existence without machinery, then every assumption the Concorde had about advancement, about technology, about progress, was flawed. The Uxery wrote, "They no longer ask where they are. They ask where they are needed." That quote became the central thesis in the new Concorde security doctrine. Humans are not enemies. They are effects of something bigger. As evidence mounted, a strange shift happened across the stars. Not fear, not awe, something else. Reverence. Ships began bearing human silhouettes on their hulls for luck. Explorers whispered their names before activating new gates. Even mercenaries left seats open at their tables, just in case. Not everyone liked it. Traditionalists called it madness. Scientists begged for clearer answers. But no one could deny the truth. The humans had found another way, one that no war, no council, no empire could deny. And the galaxy had no choice but to accept that sometimes the path forward isn't built, it's remembered. The final turning point came not with war nor with grand appearance, but with silence, profound and deliberate. For months, no human was seen. No brief flashes of presence. No cryptic messages etched in steel or sung through quantum channels. The galaxy, once gripped by awe and fear, now simmered in nervous anticipation. Something had changed. The Concorde feared the worst. That perhaps humanity had withdrawn not in peace, but in preparation. Fleets quietly rearmed. Think tanks reopened cold case files. Old doomsday protocols, once archived, half forgotten, were reviewed again under dim lights by tired leaders. Was this the calm before something greater, or something final? But the truth revealed itself in an unexpected way. At the heart of the Concorde's oldest archive world, a planetoid-sized vault of history, culture, and sealed technology, an alert triggered. Not a breach, not an alarm. A simple activation. One of the core vaults, untouched for millennia, slid open. Not forced, not hacked, open as if by invitation. Inside was a holographic record left by an extinct species, one of the first civilizations. It had been indecipherable until now, locked in a dead language with lost quantum keys. But now, as the vault opened, the record played clearly, translated perfectly, in a voice unmistakably human. The message was short. You left us behind once. You won't need to again. Shock rippled through the scientific and historical communities. How could this be? The message had been recorded long before humans were meant to exist, before Earth had even stabilized its climate. Yet the voice, the structure, the context, it was undeniably human. The implications were impossible, or worse, circular. New theories exploded. Time loops, genetic echoes, intentional seeding. Or perhaps humanity wasn't new to the stars at all. Perhaps they were the remnants of something older, something forgotten, something returning not to explore, but to reconnect. Soon after, across over 30 worlds, dormant relics began to stir. Obelisks, vaults, ruins, many believed to be inert monuments, began reacting to human presence, only to human presence. Doors opened, lights returned. Entire AI cores, thought corrupted beyond recovery, rebooted and greeted humans as original custodians. What had started as a mystery became a revelation. Humans weren't just travelers without ships. They were the reason the ships had been built in the first place. Ancient systems recognized them, not as guests, not as invaders, as heirs to something forgotten, something vast, a legacy buried not just in stone, but in space itself. A new wave of fear swept the Concorde, not from threat, but from implication. What if all civilizations had simply been squatting in a garden they didn't plant? What if humans weren't late to the galactic stage, but early? What if every achievement by every species was just them catching up? The Concorde restructured. It had to. Exploration was no longer about expansion. It became about understanding. Studying not just stars and planets, but the traces that humanity now revealed simply by standing still. It was no longer a race to conquer, but a quest to listen, to uncover the truths humans hadn't spoken, but had quietly unlocked. A universal council was formed, not to lead, but to observe. They called it the Mirror Assembly, not for humans, because of humans. It included philosophers, historians, builders, empaths, those most capable of accepting that the future might be written in the past, that the map they had followed had always been a circle. And then, after almost a year of absence, the humans returned, not in crowds, not with spectacle, quietly, one figure at a time, appearing where needed most. A rescue beacon in deep space malfunctioned, only to have a lone human appear and fix the failing oxygen systems without a word. A civil war threatened to erupt on the planet Jalvek until a human stepped into the war chamber and simply stood between the two leaders. He said nothing, and yet both leaders signed a truce within the hour. A colony devastated by plasma storms found a human already inside the ruins, helping survivors, carrying injured out of the wreckage with strength that defied gravity itself. None of these events were broadcast, but they spread. Species began to document them not as encounters, but as moments of intervention. The word miracle was used by some, correction by others. The humans never asked for thanks, never left instructions, but they always left something behind, an impression, a feeling, a presence that lingered long after they vanished again. A starry poet described it best. They do not walk among us. They walk through us, and in doing so, leave parts of themselves behind. The final consensus across the Concorde was reluctant, but unanimous. Humans had stepped beyond technological comprehension. They no longer traversed space. They inhabited it, not in a physical sense, but through intent, need, and resonance. The galactic civilizations, once so confident in their engineering and mastery of movement, now saw space itself not as a highway, but as a canvas, one humans painted on without brush or color. It wasn't about speed, or power, or ships. It never had been. It was about understanding. And in the end, the greatest truth the Concorde came to accept was this: the humans did not need vessels to cross the stars, because they had already become the path.